I was targeted. I was set up. I was incarcerated. I am Cheryl D. Glenn. This is Cheryl Speaks. Cheryl Speaks is a podcast in which I will talk about a variety of issues. Many of those issues will be political and legislative issues by their nature. I'm a former state delegate, so I want to share my perspective on those issues that are of utmost importance to the general public. This episode is my story. I had promised that I would tell my story to you. I thank you for listening. I have never talked about my story in public. So this is the first time for me to discuss my story, and I hope you will listen. I was elected to the Maryland State House of Delegates in 2006. I worked very hard. I represented the 45th Legislative District in Baltimore City. I worked hard to make sure that I was well respected by my colleagues, by those in leadership, by my constituents, most importantly. One of the major issues that I embarked on from the start of my legislative career was the issue of medical marijuana. At that time, marijuana in any form was illegal in the state of Maryland. The reason I embarked upon this journey was because of my mother, Natalie M. LaPrade, who was suffering from kidney cancer and got to a point where it was extremely difficult and painful for her to even swallow her medication. I kept hearing stories about medical marijuana and the benefits of medical marijuana for patients to relieve their suffering, their pain, to make their illnesses bearable so that they could even take whatever medicine was needed for them. So as I learned more about medical marijuana, I said, why not in the state of Maryland, why don't we allow the people of the state of Maryland to have access to this wonderful natural drug? Marijuana is a natural plant, not created by man, created by God. And it has a lot of medicinal qualities. So from my first session in 2007, for the next 7 years, I fought, I learned, I put in bills year after year after year. I stood on the shoulders of so many others who had tried to introduce medical marijuana to the state of Maryland. Now, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a poor girl from East Baltimore, proud to say that. I don't even have a college degree. I have 66 college credits beyond high school. So it became phenomenal that I became the lead voice in the Maryland General Assembly on the issue of medical marijuana. And that was because of blood, sweat, and tears, literally. Now, my mother did not live to see medical marijuana to become law in the state of Maryland. However, my sister and I held up a picture of her when Governor Martin O'Malley signed the bill that I sponsored into law. The commission became named after my mother. It was actually the Natalie M. LaPrade Medical Cannabis Commission. We were very proud of that. And that name stood as the name of the commission that controlled medical marijuana, that dealt with the licenses, that awarded the licenses until Governor Wes Moore became governor, and he changed the commission and he infused it into another agency until I believe it's the state health department. So it's no longer a standalone commission. It's no longer named after Natalie M. Lepre, but that's okay because you can't change history. And from the time the bill was passed until 2 years ago, my mother's name was associated with medical marijuana in the state of Maryland. Now let me tell you, we had 15 licenses for growing and 15 licenses for processing. That's where the big money is in medical marijuana. All of those licenses went to white men. White men in the state of Maryland. By this time, I had become chair of the Legislative Black Caucus of Maryland. And I was able to get the support of my peers, my colleagues, to say, no, we're not going to do in the state of Maryland what has been done nationally. And that is allow white men to be the only persons to play in the sandbox, to have the licenses, to make the money off of medical marijuana, when we know for the history of the United States, it's been African Americans who have been disproportionately disadvantaged, incarcerated, faced all kinds of difficulties, lifelong difficulties because of medical marijuana, period. So when you look at the country, less than, at that time it was less than 1%. We're doing a little bit better now. So less than 2% of all of the licenses held in the United States of America are owned by white people, not black people. We are extremely marginalized when it comes to being able to have ownership in this industry, this multi-trillion-dollar industry. So as the Legislative Black Caucus of Maryland, we said no. The state of Maryland population is 1/3 African American. I was able to convince then Governor Larry Hogan to do what's called a disparity study. That was the official document that supported our mandate that we needed licenses, ownership licenses, to be in the hands of African Americans in the state of Maryland. Dispensaries, we had more African Americans holding licenses for dispensaries, and that's fine. I'm not minimalizing that. However, anybody who knows anything about marijuana will tell you the big money is with growing and processing. So I was able to convince the leadership by aggressive actions that we would not stand by as a Legislative Black Caucus of Maryland, being the largest black caucus in the United States of America for any legislature. We would not stand by and let the state of Maryland follow what's happened in all the other states. We insisted that marijuana licenses be held by African Americans. Now, according to the federal government, it is illegal to set aside licenses. So what we had to do, we had to be very creative. I was very proud of the intensive work that we did as a Black Caucus under my leadership, along with then Attorney General Brian Fosh and his staff, and the commission, the Medical Marijuana Commission. We worked hand in glove. We went around the whole state of Maryland. We held conferences, educational conferences, to inform the public that licenses would now be available, more licenses, as a result of House Bill 2, which is a bill that I authored and sponsored, and it was passed into law. It was House Bill 2, and that was in 2018. I did not know that I was putting the noose around my neck. I fought the good fight. And what I did when I found out that as a result of House Bill 2, which that bill added 7 new licenses for growing and 7 new licenses for processing. We found that very wealthy white-owned companies came to Maryland and they actually replicated what's done in the construction industry far too many times. When awards are being given to minority contractors, oftentimes white-owned companies will will enter into an agreement with an African American to claim that the company is in fact owned by the African American person, and when that's not true. And we told the commission that we would not allow, the Black Caucus, we would not allow that to be the case in the state of Maryland. We made sure that we had it in writing, that the commission would do their due diligence, peel back the layers of the onion skin, make sure that whatever companies were being awarded licenses, they were in fact owned by the minority persons that were put forth as the owners. Now again, we couldn't set aside licenses. When I say we, I'm talking about the commission. So what we did, once the bill was passed, we worked on and came up with very creative regulations. It is always the regulations that dictates how a bill is going to be put forth. What are the parameters going to be for the enforcement of that particular legislation? That's what we did with House Bill 2. I was very proud of that because it took a lot of creative work. And so we looked at what the federal government did with empowerment zones. And we, in fact, put a lot of things in place so that hopefully the final award would be given to an African American. Now let me educate you on one thing. When you look at the term minority, minority includes everyone except white men. White women are considered minority, Asians, everybody, Hispanics, everybody except white men are considered minority. But when you look at the ethnic groups that have been disproportionately impacted by marijuana laws over the years, I'm talking African American. So it was important to me, representing African Americans in the state of Maryland, that the licenses would go to African Americans. So we found out from the commission at a meeting in the joint hearing room in Annapolis that they were about to award provisional licenses to companies. 2 of the top companies were multi-trillion-dollar owned white companies. And that was not acceptable to us. So myself, along with some of the members of the executive board, we stopped the whole process. I went to Attorney General Brian Frosh. I laid out a presentation to Attorney General Brian Frosh as if I was making a presentation before the Supreme Court. I was able to convince him that the process was tainted because what one of the multi-trillion-dollar companies did, they sent their white grandsons to Maryland and offered $1 million to an African American to claim that they were the ownership of this company that in fact is owned by this multi-trillion-dollar company whose name you would know if I called it. The other company, same thing. So after I convinced Attorney General Brian Fosh that this whole process was tainted, he said, Cheryl, what do you want me to do? And I said, please, you have to hire independent investigators to do what the commission was supposed to do. And that is to make sure that the dollars match the people, that the owners are who they say they are, and they didn't just take $1 million to claim ownership so that this multi-trillion-dollar company would have the license. Attorney General Brian Fosh, to his credit, did just that. 2 independent investigators were hired by the Medical Marijuana Commission. You know what happened? They disqualified the 2 white-owned multi-trillion-dollar companies. They were not able to get their licenses. That was a huge victory, because when that happened, it created the opportunity for a well-known African-American Baltimorean to be able to get their license for growing. It also opened the door for others in the field of growing and processing. There's a lot to unravel with this story, and I don't want to lose you in the weeds. I don't want to also bore you, because that's not why you're listening, because these are very, very detailed stories of what happened, who did what. But the main issue is that the target was on my back, the noose was around my neck. Because how dare I interfere with the monetary enrichment of these white-owned companies? Also, there's a company here in the state of Maryland who was one of the first ones to get all 3 licenses for growing, processing, and dispensing. The owner of that company called me one night. It was around 10 o'clock. I was in my hotel room in Annapolis. It was February, during session. Oh, he lit into me. He promised me that he was going to use all of his resources to bring me down. This person is very well known, very, very wealthy, and his company to this day is doing fantastic. In fact, some of his expansion in the area of marijuana might not have been possible if Cheryl Glenn was still in the legislature as a state delegate, because what we said when these licenses were being awarded was that there would be 1 license for 1 person. So your company couldn't hold multiple licenses. You couldn't become a conglomerate in the state of Maryland like exists in other states. We wanted to spread it out so that African Americans would have an equal opportunity to get into the business and be able to have the same opportunities as the white boys, the rich white boys. Well, what happened was I was set up. My husband passed away. It's ironic that I'm talking about this on this podcast now, because next week will be the 9th year anniversary of the death of Benjamin Glenn, my husband. He died on the original Memorial Day, May 30th, 2015. Ben was one of the best men that God ever put on this earth. However, his death opened up financial issues for me that blew my mind. I was not prepared, nor was I informed of some of the financial issues that I had to face. One of which, the first one, was a $30,000 balloon payment loan. Bank of America told me, they sent me a letter. I wasn't worried about it because I said, oh, this is my husband's debt. They said, ordinarily you'd be correct. However, this debt is attached to your house. My husband did an extension on my home. Beautiful extension. He did a great job from the basement up. Extended the entire footage of the house, doubled the space. However, that $30,000 balloon payment loan was part of what he used to do that, along with his annuity from his pension with the Carpenters Union. All that being said, I wound up in some difficulties that I was not prepared for. I had a business friend who I thought was a friend, who I had helped on multiple occasions. He used to manage bars and clubs and so forth. He was introduced to me by some other political friends who I trusted. Every time he had a political event, he would call me and say, Cheryl, can you help get some of your colleagues to come and participate so that my business can do well? Sure. I've never drank, I don't smoke, and so I would go just to get things started and leave. So when I needed some help, some financial help, because I found that the original part of my house in the basement, the whole wall was covered with mold, and my homeowner's insurance would not cover it. That's another story. So I went to my business friend to say, listen, I can't go to the bank and make a loan because things are so difficult for me right now. I'm trying to balance everything that's left over from my husband's untimely death. Can you loan me the money that I need to mitigate the mold, to remove it, and to get my wall redone in my basement? So he said, well, sure. He said, let me think about it. I can help you, but let me figure out how I can best help you. I thought nothing of it. 2 weeks later, he called with what I thought was a great idea. He said, Cheryl, I've always wanted to be a big-time lobbyist. You're the expert on marijuana in the state of Maryland. He said, so when I have a lot of people who are interested in applying for these new licenses, so how about if I set up meetings for you with my potential clients? They will pay me, and then I can help you from my own personal funds that I'm able to raise as a lobbyist. And I said, sure, because there's nothing illegal about that. I'm talking his own personal funds, me having a black and white contract with him, outlining how I will repay the loan. So it sounded good to me, because at this point I was desperate to get the mold out of my house and to get my property taxes paid and so forth and so on. So I agreed. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Remember, I've never done anything illegal in my life. My record was crystal clean until I entered into this unholy alliance with this business friend who, by the way, is still operating in political circles. Some people already know who he is. And one of these days, everything will come out in the wash. He is not the culprit, though. It's who was the wizard behind the curtain that called the shots to bring me down. That's the $64,000 question. And that is something that I'm hoping, I'm praying will be revealed one day. So what happened, he set up a meeting. It was in Annapolis. There were two white guys with him from Las Vegas, he said, who wanted to get into the marijuana business, but they wanted to trust the process. They wanted me to explain the process to them, and everything that I shared with anybody was public information. However, we had had so many missteps in the state of Maryland. People wanted some assurances before they put out their money to apply, because at that time it was very expensive to even go through the application process. Anybody who applied for a license in the state of Maryland will tell you that. So I had told him that my property tax was due, and that was the first thing I needed him to loan me the money to pay for. Again, this was not a gift, this would be a loan. He said, Cheryl, just put it in an envelope and I'll take care of it, and I'll give you the receipt, and that'll be the start of your loan repayment to me. There was no discussion in front of these guys. I didn't know them. But when I left that meeting with this person, my business friend, and I gave him the property tax bill in a white envelope, never opened it, never talked about it in front of these men. Those two men, the same day, called the FBI and said that I was using my position as a state delegate to get money. How do I know that? The FBI told me that. The business friend of mine on several occasions met with me to give me money, to help me get all of this stuff done that I needed to have done with my home. And again, I was not able to get the help from anybody else or anywhere else. My granddaughter, who is my daughter, Ben and I raised her, she lives here in the house with me. I might not have been as concerned about the mold had it not been for the fact that she was here. You could not sit in my family room without the mold burning the inside of your nostrils. That's how intense the smell was. And anybody knows that mold is very hazardous to your health in many ways. So one of the occasions when I was meeting with my business friend and he was loaning me money, the FBI intervened. They swooped in on me. I said to him, who are these people? That was the last time I've laid eyes on him, my business friend. The FBI became a part of my life at that time. That was in 2000, the end of 2018. Not the end, I'm sorry, October of 2018. They told me that I had never been on their radar. They said that my name had never been brought up to them. Their whole involvement with me started as a result of the phone call from the two white men who was a part of that meeting with me with my business friend. That's a setup all day long. All day long. I didn't know these men. And they said to me, they said, Cheryl, who did you piss off? Because you're absolutely right. You were set up, but we have to do our job. You are an elected official. You can't take money to sell the opportunities that you can create as a result of being a state delegate. I said, that's not what I'm doing. I'm borrowing personal money from someone with every, intention to pay them back. I don't owe anybody anything in the state of Maryland. I always have repaid any debt that I had. But the FBI had to do their due diligence. But you know what? Think about it. When have you ever seen the FBI bring a person down? They never came to my home. You never saw anything on the news where they were coming to my home, taking out my computers, confiscating my telephones, anything. They never did that. They never came to my office in Annapolis. They never took anything out from my office. They never interviewed any of my staff. They never interviewed any of my family. It was one thing that someone wanted to do, someone very powerful, and that was to remove Cheryl Glenn from the Maryland State General Assembly. And they were able to do that. I did not have one person who's a lawyer. I know a bunch of lawyers in the state of Maryland. Nobody offered their services to me, so what did I do? I had to accept the lawyer that the FBI recommended to me. Now, I will tell you, I remember J. Wendell Gordon, who I think is a phenomenal lawyer, nicknamed the Warrior Lawyer. I remember when my story was being tossed around on Facebook, and nobody really knew what happened. But J. Wendell Gordon said on Facebook that when people take a plea, they enter into a guilty plea. Most of the time, it's because they don't have the resources to be able to afford their own lawyer. It's really not because they're guilty. And that's what happened with me. I remember arguing with my lawyer for about 3 hours one day, crying, snotting, everything. And I told him I didn't want to plead guilty to anything because I wasn't guilty of what I was being accused of. They had tapes, and I swore at that time that the tapes had been manipulated. Everything that was said between me and my business friend, he was taping me whenever we met, by the way. Those tapes, the conversations have been manipulated so that you would only hear what you wanted to hear. Again, somebody very wealthy, very powerful, with the right political connections, had to be the wizard behind the curtain in the state of Maryland. And so that is how I was put in a position of having to take a guilty plea, because my lawyer said if you don't take a guilty plea and go to court, 9 times out of 10 the FBI wins their cases. If you are found guilty, you won't get any of the considerations that you will get if you take a guilty plea. In other words, my lawyer told me that, Cheryl, with your record, with the fact that you have a squeaky clean record, I've never even had a speeding ticket. I've never been in trouble in my life until then. He said, it's not likely that you will ever see any jail time. You will probably get probation before judgment. He said he had been doing federal cases for 40 years. And he talked to the other partners in his company. None of them expected me to go to jail. All of them expected, at the very most, probation before judgment. They were wrong, because they didn't realize whoever was the wizard behind the curtain was very, very powerful and wanted me out of the political picture in the state of Maryland. So the judge gave me 24 months and 3 years probation. I went to jail, and I had to resign my position the beginning of 2019. I had to give up my position, my pension, and $20,000 I had to pay in restitution. That was taken from pension money that was already accumulated before I became a legislator. So they took all that they could take. However, they didn't take my spirit. They didn't take my voice. I'm still here. And this is why I wanted to do Cheryl Speaks podcast, because I want to make public the dirtiness, the crookedness, the deals that are cut. When you talk about money, and when you start stepping on the toes of wealthy people, but you know what's important for me to say to you? If I had to do it all over again, I would do the same thing the same way, because I stood up for black people in the state of Maryland to be able to get licenses, not franchises. Franchises is modern day sharecropping. I wanted black people to have ownership in the marijuana business, and I knew what was coming. I knew eventually that we would pass the law to make marijuana legal recreationally. That's what we did. But what happens? Everyone who had a license for medical marijuana automatically shifted into recreational marijuana. There is no equality for black folk in the state of Maryland. There is none. Yes, we have people who own licenses for dispensaries, but I dare you to ask, how many black people own licenses for growing and processing? I will continue to put more meat on the bone with my story as we move forward with Cheryl Speaks. Thank you for listening. I hope you like and subscribe and share and all of that good stuff. Get everybody involved in Cheryl Speaks. I'm on board, unbossed. Nobody controls me anymore. There's nothing they can threaten me with. I have the microphone. I'm going to tell it like it is. Thank you.